Hey, I'm Liz. I spent too much money and time buying and testing tents of all sizes, ranging from smaller 2-person tents all the way to massive 10-person tents. And yes, every single one of these came in at under $200 each. So if that's your budget for a camping tent, here's everything you need to know. Now let's get right into our first category, the 2-person tents. Here are the tents that I picked up for the 2-person category. The North Face Stormbreak, REI Trailmade, Alps Mountaineering Zephyr, Kelty Late Start, Teton Mountain Ultra, and the Coleman Sundome. If you've never seen a video from this channel before, I typically test all my camping tents by putting them through 6 different tests: spaciousness, ease of setup, features, rain protection, quality, and portability. Now here's everything you need to know for spaciousness. For the inner base area, I measured each tent's length and width. For the vestibule area, I also measured the length and width of each vestibule, and putting both those numbers together gives you the total area. The peak height is just the height at the center of the tent, and I also looked at the number of vertical walls that each tent has. The North Face Stormbreak has a decent inner base area and one of the biggest vestibules I've seen for a 2-person tent, giving it the biggest base area of all the tents here. The peak height isn't the highest, but it has the most livable space thanks to the pretty ingenious 4-pole structure this tent has. Most tents will have 2 tent poles for the main body, and that's all. But the Stormbreak has an extra 2 short tent poles that go at the top of the tent. These 2 extra poles pull the tent body up, giving you an extended peak height throughout this entire square area at the top, which feels so much more spacious when you're inside the tent. On the other hand, the smallest total area goes to the Coleman Sundome because it doesn't have any vestibules at all, like none. It also doesn't have any vertical walls because it has only that simple 2-pole structure that I talked about, but thankfully the peak height is really high, so it still felt surprisingly roomy inside. Typically, I've noticed that more expensive tents tend to have more poles, while less expensive budget tents tend to have less poles, so less livable space inside the tent. Basically, the more expensive a tent, the better the design. The next test is the ease of setup and pack away, and the downside to having a better designed tent with more poles is that it takes longer to actually set it up and pack away. But for myself, I would take the extra 2 minutes to set up and pack away the tent for a larger base area and more livable space than to have an easier setup with no vestibules and much less space. Up next, we'll see how feature-rich each tent is, and this is a very quick and dirty summary of what to look out for. Most importantly, having 2 doors is better for a 2-person tent. This is the most important thing, and a secondary thing to look out for is at least having 2 or more pockets. Again, tents that are more expensive tend to have more features than tents that are cheaper. The next test we're going to look at is rain protection, and here's a summary of everything you need to know. Typically, the better quality tents should be able to last at least 12 hours in the rain with no leaks. On the other hand, more budget tents tend to start leaking after just a couple hours, and the really budget ones like Coleman survive for only about 30 minutes before the first leak into the tent. That's because Coleman doesn't typically seal their seams in their budget range like the Sundome. They use inverted seams instead of seam taping, which start leaking after just 30 minutes. Also, the waterproof rating comes in at just 450 millimeters, which isn't nearly enough to prevent the rainfly from starting to soak through after about 30 minutes in. This leads to not just the seams leaking, but also the fabric leaking, and it's, definitely not the best performing of all the other tents here. The 5th test is quality of the materials. Here's what to look out for. Typically, 150D is double the thickness of a normal tent. 75D is quite typical, and 68D is a little too thin for comfort. For zippers, YKK is the best, followed by SBS, and then the Chinese or no brand zippers. DAC aluminum is the best for poles, followed by 7000 series aluminum, and fiberglass poles are the cheapest and most likely to break. Again, the more expensive tents tend to have better materials, and the more budget tents tend to have less high quality materials. The last test for now is portability, and this is mainly just looking at the weight of the tent and the pack size. Usually, thicker materials will lead to a heavier overall weight, but the reason the Coleman is so heavy is because fiberglass poles tend to be quite a bit heavier than aluminum. Based on all these super quick tests that I've just showed you, here's how I rated each of the 2-person tents in this video. In this table, you can see not only the overall score of each tent, but also the retail price. The overall scores range from 5 to almost 9, and all the tents range from about $70 to the max of $200. For this video though, we're only going to focus on the highest possible score, so that's the North Face Stormbreak 2, which is quite obviously our 2-person winner. Price is definitely on the higher end of these tents, but thankfully so is the scoring, and here's how it compares to the other 2-person tents that we've tested. Now, our next category is one size up, and that's 4-person tents. So far, here's all the brands that we've seen in this video. For the North Face and REI, the Stormbreak and the Trailmade are already the cheapest tents in their entire lineup. We unfortunately won't be seeing them anymore for the rest of this video, so for 4-person tents we are left with just these 4 brands now. These are the tents that we're going to test against each other: the Teton Mountain Ultra, Alps Mountaineering Lynx, the Kelty Wireless, and the Coleman Sundome. And this may not come as a surprise if you were looking closely at the 2-person scoring, but my favorite pick is easily the Teton Mountain Ultra 4, and here's exactly why. The first test that the Teton aced was the rain test. I put it through not just a 1-hour heavy rain test, but it even continued to rain for another 12 hours or so, and not a single drop of water got into the tent. The second test that the Teton aced was the quality test, complete with double thick polyester, very durable ripstop, and 7000 series T6 aluminum poles. When it comes to features, the Teton was also the best. It didn't have the most pockets, that's a Kelty Wireless, but it had the best doors of any of the tents here. The zippers aren't branded, but I thought the entire zipper track was surprisingly smooth. Definitely the best of all the 4-person tents here. On top of that, each door comes with its very own door pocket, so after unzipping each door, I was able to just quickly stuff the fabric into the pockets. This is something I've noticed in more expensive tents. On the other hand, all the other tents in this category had these door toggles instead, which is typical of less expensive tents, and it takes more time to stow the door away. Now, I think the biggest drawback of the Teton is the smaller than average base area. It's 5 square feet, or about 10% smaller than the average of all the tents here. As for the setup and pack away timings, the Teton was pretty much average. Same thing with the weight of each tent as well. Again, here's the chart where you can check out both the prices of each of the tents, plus their overall scores for all the 4-person tents in this video. And of course, the Teton Mountain Ultra comes in right at the top, and it's the only tent that actually performs quite a bit above average. All the other tents are either average performing or below average for the price. Again, the price for the Teton is definitely at the upper range of our budget for this video, but at least it did great compared to the other options that we had. One size up, and we have 6-person tents this time. Here are the brands that we tested in our 4-person tents category. But since the biggest tent we can get from Teton on a budget of just $200 is a 4-person capacity, we unfortunately won't be able to work with this brand anymore from now. So for 6-person tents, we're left with just 3 brands now. Here are the 3 tents that we're going to test right now. 1. The Coleman Sundome 6. 2. The Kelty Discovery Basecamp 6. And 3. The Alps Mountaineering Merrimack 6. When it comes to spaciousness, one big difference you will notice from our 2- and 4-person tents that came before is the lack of any vestibules for the 6-person tents here. In our 4-person tents category, almost all the tents had vestibules. However, in order to get a bigger tent for the same price of about $200, the brands do have to keep their costs down with a simple pole-supported awning rather than an actual full-length vestibule where you can fit gear and furniture. So if you're expecting to keep your wet gear out of the tent, you're going to have to set up a separate tarp on your own. Another way that the brands keep costs down is by using a very bare bones 2-pole dome structure in these 6-person tents, whereas you can find 3 or even 4-pole structures in smaller tents, giving you more livable space inside. So for these tents here, you don't get an extended peak height or any vertical walls. But one benefit of 6-person tents is that you tend to get a peak height of usually at least 6 feet, allowing you to stand up inside, which is something you can't usually do in smaller tents. Yet another way the brands keep their costs down is by using cheaper materials in the tent. Notice that the materials aren't thick at all, the zippers are not branded, and instead of aluminum poles like you see in 4-person tents, there's only fiberglass poles here because they're much cheaper to make. As for the ease of setup, the timings are mostly the same, with the Kelty being a little bit faster because it has thicker and beefier poles that don't pop out of the grommets when setting up, and it also has a shark's-mouth carry bag, making it easy to pack away everything. For features to keep costs down, most budget tents will only have one door. So the Alps Merrimack having 2 doors was a really nice surprise. And for the heavy rain test, I was surprised that Kelty didn't skimp on the waterproofing and it held up great with no leaks at all. For portability, here's all the info you need to know. They're actually not very different from each other. Now, here's how much each of the tents cost and also the scores of each one. Notice that the scores here are very, very close, less than 1 point from each other. So honestly, you can go with any of these and the result will mostly be the same. But since I got to pick just one for our 6-person winner, that'll be the highest score, the Kelty Discovery Basecamp 6. The price is definitely within our budget, but notice that the scores for this category aren't very high compared to the 2- and 4-person tents that we've tested before. Basically, you see quite a significant drop in quality, especially because $200 isn't a lot for a pretty big 6-person tent. Oh, and one tip here is instead of guessing the Discovery Basecamp, you can consider Kelty's like Discovery Element 6 instead. It has a vestibule at the front of the tent, so it'll score even higher than the Kelty tent that you saw here, but it's also about 10% more expensive. Now, here are the brands in our 6-person category, along with all the tents that we've tested and the price as well. Both Alps Mountaineering and Kelty don't have any 8-person tents, and even if they did, it wouldn't be in our budget. So the last brand we're going to work with here is Coleman. More specifically for this category, we're going to look at Coleman's cheapest 8-person tent, the Montana 8, which you can usually get for just over $100, definitely below $200 most of the time. We talked about the Coleman Sundome 2 to 6-person tents a lot in this video, which is a very simple dome tent, and the Montana is just like a slightly extended sundome. Instead of getting 92.6 square feet of interior space, which fits only about 6 pads or 2 queens, you get 103.5 square feet instead. This fits a whopping 8 pads or 3 queens. The second pro of the Montana is the huge front awning, which provides quite a bit of shade from the hot sun and definitely beats the almost by comparison non-existent awning of the Sundome. And the third pro is the hinge door, which is one of my favorite Coleman features. Coleman will provide you with these like 2 extra fiberglass poles to install the hinge door. It also comes complete with a handle outside and inside the tent. And when you have this hinge door, it takes just like 5 seconds tops to get in and out. On the other hand, zipping a door open and shut will take more like 15 seconds or maybe even more depending on how snaggy your zippers are. And you can still always zip up the hinge door as well, even with the fiberglass poles in place. Overall, I think Coleman is a really great budget pick if you need like a large 8-person tent here, and I did like all the extra features of the Montana compared to the Sundome, but unfortunately, even Coleman's 10-person tents will bust our $200 budget, so the only option we have here is the most budget brand known to man, Ozark Trail. It's not a bad tent at all, coming in with 136.5 square feet of base area, and this fit 10 pads nicely or 4 queen beds. It even has a nice tall peak height of a whopping 88 inches, which I couldn't even reach. But of course it has its drawbacks as well. There's only one door in this massive tent. There's not a lot of storage with only 2 pockets and 1 gear loft, and waterproofing is basically non-existent. But at a price of $150 to $190, depending on where you buy it from, it's not a terrible pick. It's actually a very functional tent for fair weather. If $200 is a little bit out of your budget and you need something for $100 or less, here's the perfect video on screen for you to check out with way more in-depth testing than you saw in this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you